The Prophet's conversation with a pagan. Perhaps the most remarkable feature of the character of the Arabs was their openness, outspokenness, or frankness to the point of being blunt and tough. The talk that Kinana b. Abd Yalal, a pagan chief, had with the Prophet of God illustrates the brusqueness of the sons of the desert. Kinana said, "As for adultery, we mostly remain bachelors or cannot get married, so we must need to indulge in it." The Prophet replied, "That is unlawful for you. God has commanded, and come not near unto fornication. Lo! It is an abomination and an evil way." Quran 17:32. Kinana said again, "What you say about usury means our entire property is nothing but usury." "You have the right," replied the Prophet, "to get back the original sum lent by you, for God has ordered, O who believe, observe your duty to Allah, and give up what remaineth, due to you, from usury, if are, in truth, believers." Quran 2:278. As regards wine, Kinana said further, "It is the juice of our lands and a must for us." "Allah has forbidden it," replied the Prophet, and then recited the verse, "O who believe! Strong drink and games of chance and idols and divining arrows are only an infamy of Satan's handiwork. Leave it aside in order that may succeed." Quran 5 hours 90 minutes. Kinana again inquired, "What do you say about the idol Rabbah?" "Break it," answered the Prophet. Kinana and his companions were taken aback. They protested, "If Rabbah were to know that you want to break her, she would finish all of her priests." Umar, may Allah be pleased with him, now intervened to say, "O Abd Yalal, woe to you! How ignorant are you! What else is Rabbah except a stone?" Kinana and his friends replied angrily, "Ibn al-Khattab, we have not come to ask you." Then turning to the Prophet, he said, "You may break it, but we cannot." The Prophet then said to them, "I will send someone with you who will do it for you." The deputation then took its leave from the Prophet, who gave them a send-off. Before leaving for their homes, they requested the Prophet to appoint a leader for them. Uthman b. Abi al-As was selected by the Prophet to act as their leader. He was the youngest among them, but the Prophet had noticed his keen interest in religion, and he had also learned some of the Quran before leaving Medina. Commandment for zakat and charity. The divine commandment making it incumbent upon the Muslims to pay zakat, i.e. a tax at a fixed rate in proportion to the worth of the property, was revealed in the 9th year of the Hijrah. The Prophet sent the order for collection of poor due to all the functionaries appointed in the areas where the people had accepted Islam. Farewell pilgrimage. Everything had come about as willed by Allah. The faith in one God had cleansed and illuminated the souls. The devil within had been cast away together with the vileness of the pagan past. The false deities been removed from the house of God. Once again, the believers' hearts were set on going to the holy sanctuary, for it was already a very long time since they had been there. The mission of the Prophet of God was also nearing completion, as he was soon to bid farewell to his loving companions. And so, Allah permitted his messenger to take them for pilgrimage, and thus, it was the first Hajj of the Prophet, in Islam. Educational aspect of the pilgrimage. The reason for the Prophet setting out from Medina for the pilgrimage were many. He had to meet the Muslims coming from far and near, to teach them the observances of faith and the rituals of Hajj, to bear witness to the truth and thus finally redeem his pledge to God, to advise them as well as to give them final instructions, to administer them an oath to follow his teachings and to trample under his feet the last remnants of the pagan past. His pilgrimage was, in truth and reality, better than 1,000 sermons and lessons. It was an itinerant school, a mosque on the move, or an ongoing training center which imparted knowledge to the unenlightened, animated the languid and indolent souls, and invested the weak in spirit with the power of faith. All this was achieved under the benevolent and affectionate care of the greatest teacher, the Prophet of God. Unique record of the farewell pilgrimage. The minutest details of the Prophet's journey have been preserved by the most trustworthy narrators, the companions of the Prophet, may Allah be pleased with them. It is a record so authentic and detailed, for never before did there exist any historical document of such comparable genuineness, be that of an emperor's itinerary or of the memoirs of any saint or scholar. A synopsis of the farewell pilgrimage. The Prophet set out from Medina on Saturday, the 25th of Dhul Qa'dah, after performing the forenoon prayer followed by a sermon in which he explained the essentials of entering the pilgrim state known as Ihram. The Messenger of God then went ahead raising his voice in praise of God, "At your service, O God, at your service, at your service. You have no partner, at your service. Praise and grace are thine, and the dominion, you have no partner." The entire crowd chanted this talbiyah along with the Prophet, where some curtailed a few words while others supplemented it with a few more in a tremor of excitement. But the Prophet did not admonish them. He kept on repeating the acclamation of God until he reached Araj, where he encamped. Abu Bakr, may Allah be pleased with him, and the Prophet, rode on the same dromedary. The stages in the journey ahead were at Al-Abwa, the Wadi of Asfan, Saraf, and then Dai Tawa, where he stayed during Saturday night. It was now the 4th of Dhul-Hijjah. The Prophet offered the morning prayer at this place and also took a bath. The caravan now bent its steps towards Mecca and entered the valley from its heights. It was an hour or so before noon when his glance fell on the Kaaba. He exclaimed, "O God, increase the honor and estimation, deference and awe of your house." And then lifting up his hands, he raised his voice to say, "God is great." Then he said, "Peace be upon thee, O God, peace is from thee, O Lord, cause us to live in peace." The first thing he did on entering the sanctuary was to go straight to the Kaaba. He kissed the black stone stationed in the southeast corner, and then moved on to encompass the Kaaba 7 times, commencing on the right and leaving the Kaaba on the left. He went round at a slow pace. The Prophet was walking at a quicker step, but the paces were not long. The seamless garment in which he had wrapped himself was thrown loosely over one shoulder, the other being left bare. Each time he passed the Hajar Aswad, he touched it with a stick in his hand and kissed it. Thereafter he proceeded to the station of Abraham and recited the Quranic verse, "Take as your place of worship." The place where Abraham stood, to prayer, Quran 2:125. And then offered 2 units of prayer. Going back to the Hajar Aswad after the prayer, he kissed it again, and then he brought himself to As-Safa from the opposite door. On reaching near As-Safa, the Prophet said, "Lo! As-Safa and Al-Marwa are among the signs of God." Quran 2:158. I begin with what Allah began with. So he mounted it until he could see the house of God, declared God's unity and proclaimed his greatness facing the Qibla. He affirmed, "There is no God but Allah alone, who has no partner. To him belongs the dominion, to him praises is due, and he is omnipotent. There is no God but Allah, who alone has fulfilled his promise, helped his servant, and alone routed the confederates." The Prophet remained in Mecca from Saturday to Wednesday. On Thursday morning he came to Mina along with the Muslims, performed the Zuhr and Asr prayers and stayed there for the night. It was the night before Friday. After the sun had risen he moved for Arafat, where he saw the tent set up for him at Namra. God's messenger rested in the tent, and when the sun had passed the meridian he ordered Kaswa to be brought. When it was saddled for him, he went down into the valley and addressed the people, wherein he explained to them the fundamental principles of Islam and struck at the roots of polytheism and ignorance. He commanded to treat as inviolable and sacrosanct the life, honor, and property of every person, as warranted by all the religions, and declared that all the usages and customs of the pagan past were abolished. The Prophet abolished the usury of the pre-Islamic days, although he allowed the recovery of the original sums lent to the debtors. In his sermon, the Prophet addressed the rights of women, threw light on the mutual obligations of the husband and wife, and bade the people to deal kindly and provide food and clothing to their spouses in a fitting manner. Thereafter, referring to the Book of Allah, he told his companions that if they hold fast to it they would never fall into error. Finally, he told them that on the Day of Judgment, Allah would ask them about him, so what reply would they give on that day? The entire congregation chorused that they would testify that he had conveyed the message and fulfilled his mission. Then, raising his finger towards the sky, the Prophet said, "O Allah, be witness," repeating it thrice. He also asked those who are present to spread it out to those who were absent. The sermon ended, and the Prophet asked Bilal to give the call to prayer. After the call was over, he performed the noon and afternoon prayers, making only 2 rakats for each. It was then Friday when the Prophet delivered this sermon. The Prophet then mounted his camel and came to Maqif, the place of standing, where he remained atop the camel until sunset, lamenting, beseeching and glorifying the Lord. He appeared to be tormented and disconsolate, repeatedly raising his hands in prayer to his chest, like a man bereaved and an indigent crying for his livelihood. He was heard saying, "O God, you hear what I say, and see where I am, and know what I conceal or reveal. Nothing can remain hidden from thee. I am tormented, indigent, and miserable, seeking refuge with thee as one who is sorrow-stricken and horrified. I acknowledge my sins and confess my faults. I call upon thee like a beggar and cry unto thee like an abased sinner. I beseech thee like one who is dismayed and harassed, falling prone before thee, and shedding tears, like one who has thrown oneself at your feet and is licking the dust. O God, cause me not to fail in supplication to thee, be kind and merciful unto me. Lo, you art the best of all those who are implored and the most generous of all the bestower." It was then that God sent down the revelation. "This day I have perfected your religion for you and completed my favor unto you, and have chosen for you as your religion al-Islam." Quran 5:3. When the disk of the sun had disappeared, the prophet, took Usama up behind him and wended ahead slowly, holding the halter of his camel in a way that his head, lowered in submission to God, almost touched the saddle. The prophet was repeating the talbiyah, "At your service, O Allah, at your service," and asking the people to proceed slowly and gently. He kept raising his voice in talbiyah until he came to Muzdalifah. There he ordered Bilal, may Allah be pleased with him, to give the call for prayers and performed the sunset prayer before the camels were rested and unloaded. He recited the night prayer after the camels were relieved and then went to take rest and slept till dawn. Having performed the dawn prayer early in the morning, the prophet, mounted on Kaswa and came to Mash'ar al-Haram, the sacred site in Muzdalifah, where he faced the Qibla, supplicated God and declared his greatness until the morning light was clear. Thus he glorified God before the sun had risen. Then he left Muzdalifah with Fadlbi Abbas, may Allah be pleased with him, up behind him on top of his camel, chanting the talbiyah all the way. He asked Ibn Abbas, may Allah be pleased with him, to pick up 7 small pebbles for Rami Jimar. When he came to the middle of the valley of Muhassir, he urged his camel to go fast and passed the plain quickly, for it was the place where punishment was inflicted upon the army of Abraha. The prophet came to Mina and from there to the Jamrat al-Aqaba. There he threw the pebbles after the sun had fully risen and ended it with the recitation of talbiyah. Returning to Mina, the prophet delivered a resolute address in which he dwelt upon the sacredness of Yom an-Nar and the significance Allah has assigned to the day. He elucidated the honor and distinction conferred by God on Makkah over all the cities of the world and called upon the people to follow whoever guided them in accordance with the Book of Allah. Then, asking the people present there to learn the rites of pilgrimage from him, the prophet urged them not to revert to the ways of the infidels, beheading one another after him. He asked those present to convey everything he had told them to those who were absent. Thereafter, he said, worship your Lord, offer prayers 5 times a day, observe fast for a month, in Ramadan, obey those of you who are in authority and you shall enter the Jannah of your Lord. The prophet also said something to his companions on this occasion which alluded to his valediction, and hence the pilgrimage came to be known as the farewell pilgrimage. The prophet then went to the place of sacrifice in Mina and sacrificed 63 camels by his own hand, the number of sacrificial camels being analogous to the number of years he remained alive. He ordered Ali to sacrifice the remaining excess number to make up a total of 100 camels sacrificed on his behalf. The offering having been completed, he sent for the barber, got his head shaved and distributed his shaved hair among the people. Then he returned to Mecca on his mount and went round the Kaaba again. After that he came near the well of Zamzam and drank its water without sitting down, and returned to Mina on the same day. He spent the night at Mina, where he stayed until the sun had passed the meridian. Then he proceeded to stone the Jamras, and starting from the first one he went on to throw pebbles on the middle Jamra and finally on the last one. The Prophet delivered 2 sermons at Mina, one on the day of sacrifice which has been mentioned earlier and the next on the day after. The Prophet remained at the place to perform the stoning of the Jamras on the 3 days after the day of sacrifice, known as Ayam Tashrik. Thereafter he departed for Medina. When the outskirts of Medina appeared, he raised his voice to say, "Allah is great," 3 times and then said, "There is no God but Allah. He is one, without any partner, to him belongs the dominion and the praise, and he has power over all things. We are the returning and the repenting and the submitting and the worshipping. God has fulfilled his promise and helped his bondman and alone routed the Confederates." The Prophet entered Medina in the broad daylight.